I'm Branch Meanley. I'm sitting here with two good friends and fellow competitors, Brian Eikenberry and R.K. Scott. I've known both of these gentlemen for years. R.K., the first time I met you was 1978. You were shooting on the round ball bench line. I was extremely intimidated, not only by, I think, the size and the noise of the 62 you shot, but of the scores that were being shot. It was an unbelievable experience for me. And Brian, I remember meeting you later on the slug gun line. I still recall seeing your daughter, Sarah, I think she was about 10 years old, her feet dangling off of the stool, shooting a slug rifle, shot 100 with 10 X's at 100 yards.
A lot of people were rooting for that, though.
Not a nerve in her body anywhere. What we're going to try and show you is the development and transition from round ball guns to bullet rifles, the quest for more accuracy, where this got started shooting the current day slug rifle at Friendship in these matches, one of the transitional guns from the 1950s and a little bit of history to go with that. And ultimately in our next segment, we're going to wind up with the slug rifles of today. The scores have done nothing but go up. The competition is extremely tight. And RK, let's start with you. Tell us what you have here in front of us.
Okay, this is a picket gun, Nelson Lewis, built in the early 1870s. It's the first transitional piece from the patched round ball to a bullet-type projectile, if you can see it.
And that was loaded with a patch also?
Yeah, a coarse linen patch.
Okay.
At the time. The United States was light years behind the English and the Irish on textiles, so they had to use a real coarse weave cotton things, which were very thick.
So what period in time are we talking?
Started working on them in the early 1840s when we got into the percussion era.
Okay.
And of course the quest was for more yardage with a heavier bullet.
Okay.
Target shooters were really wanting that.
So this was a quest for accuracy. At longer range.
Yes, indeed.
So when this was being developed, when it was being tried, what I know about it, there were certain problems in loading the bullet straight. If it wasn't loaded straight, the accuracy was not good at all.
Because the darn thing is so short and they had a little flange on the back, it was very difficult to get it into the muzzle straight. If they could get it in straight, they shot very well. Most of the time, they couldn't get it in straight. So a guy named Alvin Carter got the original concept behind the false muzzle. Alvin wasn't a gunsmith. He actually made telescopes for a living. And a fellow named Edwin Wesson, and the old-time collectors will know who this guy is, took it and flew with it and patented with it. And the false muzzle does two things. It allows you to, once it's tapered on the front, to load the bullet straight and use a little bit bigger bullet. And it also keeps you from wearing out the crown on your gun from the cleaning rods and loading rods.
Okay, so that was actually the false muzzle. I can compare it, I guess, to current day false muzzles we use. Is it actually part of the rifle? It's rifled?
Integral with the rifle.
Okay, so and that allowed the bullet to be funneled in
straight,
which increased the accuracy.
Absolutely. Right.
So typically, I know this was pre-Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
What would this rifle, for instance, have been used in the Civil War?
They were. Berdan's sharpshooters, when they qualified at Kalamazoo in Michigan, were required to bring their own picket rifle. It wasn't called a picket rifle then, by the way. And they had to shoot standing, offhand, 10 shots into a 10-inch circle at 200 yards to qualify.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable accuracy.
Yeah. And they actually did use them in the early part of the Civil War, and I think that's where they got the name picket gun, because the guys who used them actually used picket ball guns. They called them pickets. Pickets are the guys that get out on the flanks to keep you from getting flanked.
I see.
You know about that.
Oh yeah, I do. Now, on this particular gun, this is a very artistic rifle. you said Nelson Lewis rifle, and the period on this rifle again would have been built
Yeah, in the early 1870s.
1870s. Now, these were also used in shooting target competition?
Yeah. Yeah, at 200 yards or 40 rods.
Which is a little over
200 yards.
About 220 somewhere in
220
there.
something or other, yeah.
So the term 40 rods comes, from an old unit of measure.
Correct.
These rifles were really, that was the test of accuracy, how the rifle performed at 40 rods. Now, I notice the scope on this. A lot of people probably were not aware that telescopic sights were in use in that time period.
Yes,
Tell us a little bit about the scope.
It's an original Nelson Lewis, which has the elevations on the wrist, and this one has windage on the front, which was a later concept. Before, you didn't have any windage on the front. You had to drift it over with a hammer. All right, this is an original Nelson Lewis telescope. You can see that it has elevation on the back. You turn this thing and screw it up and down. And his concept was this apparatus on the front, which gives you windage.
So you would physically move the scope side to side?
Absolutely, yeah.
It had a fixed crosshair in it.
Yeah, and it was return to battery scope. You took the false muzzle off, obviously, when you shot it. And when you shot it, it would slide forward.
So the rifle would recoil and the scope would absorb the recoil by moving.
Moving forward so it wouldn't poke you in the face. And then, of course, when you went to shoot it, you had to pull the darn thing back into position or you had a problem.
So, in this time period, with this type of rifle, the accuracy that we get today in the next generation, the transition of the slug rifle. If optimum conditions, what kind of accuracy could somebody expect from a picket gun?
Close to minute of angle.
Really? Out to 200 yards?
Out to 200 yards.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah. But all key to being able to load the bullet straight.
That's correct. What they did is they increased the pitch in the rifling. They used to start out at 1 in 48 and gradually got it to 1 in 32 or 1 in 36, and they straightened out the sides on the picket ball to get it in there straighter. And then when they went to Irish linen, of all things, which is very thin and very strong, and oiled it, that really helped matters.
So it was gain twist rifling.
This is a gain twist, ending in 26.
Starting out slow.
Yep.
Upsetting the bullet, and as the bullet goes
Right.
forward, it's constantly in new lead.
That's correct.
And increases its rotation.
Yes, it does.
Very interesting. Now, Brian, like I say, that was my first recall of meeting you, watching your young daughter just shoot 110 X's with not a nerve in her body, giggling, laughing, wiggling her feet at the bench. You've got one of the slug rifles. Now, this is a modern day slug rifle which shoots a longer bullet, still utilizes the false muzzle, and that's interesting looking bullet. Brian, hold that up and tell us a little bit about that so we can tell the difference between a picket gun and a slug rifle.
This is a two-piece bullet, and of course the base you want soft lead as possible, the nose you temper, and everybody has their own idea how much to temper, but it's definitely got to be harder. The nose has a elongation on it, and it will go back inside the base. We call that a boat tail. And then you put them together when you swedge them together, it sizes the bullet and will also make them fit together through the base and the nose.
So what you get then, you get one piece that for all intents and purposes has a coined surface. It's very smooth. It has a very precise shape, and more than likely has to be the correct size for a particular gun to shoot in.
Very much so. You're going to find all of these guns are basically handmade, even the ones that are made by guys that make several of them, but every gun comes out different. So maybe 1,000, maybe 2,000, some are as much as 5,000 made by the same maker. But they're all basically the same, It's just the bullet has to have its own swedge, what we call a swedge, and that sizes the bullet, puts these together. Without that swedge, the gun's nothing.
So, slug rifles, the transition from picket guns to slug rifles occurred about when?
1880s.
1880s. And I know many matches with some of the more famous builders, gun builders, barrel makers of the time were shot in Vermont. They were 40-rod matches and shot into the 1900s.
That's correct.
And we're still trying to match some of those scores.
Some of incredible. And some of those more famous builders would have been
Warner was one. They used to have big money matches. They would shoot 10 shots at 40 rods for over $1,000 plus side bets.
What about like Brockway?
Brockway made
Needner.
Needner. There was
Even Harry Pope.
Harry Pope made a few. That's correct.
But you find those guys shot every day. There were a lot of them were rifle makers, and they got out every morning for the wind blew on their bicycle. Pope did this, rode his bicycle to the range, and he shot every day. So with practice, you get better, you know.
I know someone we're going to talk to in a little while later that sneaks out and shoots all the time, too.
I know.
The transition from picket gun to slug rifle. Slug rifle had, at that time, now they were coming up with adjustable, still external adjustable scopes.
Adjustment, correct.
When did adjustable objective lens start coming in?
1930s.
1930s. Mm-hmm. All right, now this is a scope made by Lyman. It's a super target spot. It's a 20 power, so it has an adjustable objective lens for parallax. This rifle, Brian, made by who?
P.I. Spence made this rifle. Marietta, Ohio made this rifle. I cannot tell you exactly when he made it. I have only heard of 2 slug guns that he ever made. He made a lot of round ball guns, this being one of them. He didn't have much equipment. I do know that from all the stories I've read about him, and it was very crude equipment. Some of it was even beyond crude. But he didn't worry about the outside of this gun. He worried about the bore. That's all he worried about. So
now, we heard just a minute ago the picket rifle had a gain twist to gradually increase the rotation. Did these rifles have a gain or a uniform twist?
This is a uniform twist, about 1/17.
Okay, and that would be 45 caliber?
This is a 4.75.
Okay, so odd size caliber.
Very odd size caliber. But
so the picket gun has a much earlier generation telescopic sight.
Right.
Shoots a percussion cap for ignition with a traditional side hammer ignition. This gun, I noticed, is an underhammer design. What's the device in the bottom?
We use primers with that. It's a primer attachment. This is, when I got involved in this in '74, they were just coming to start to use a lot of primers. A lot of shooters still use the caps. A few of them were using primers. This happens to be one of the earlier designs, which is interesting on what the primer fits into, if I can pull this out of here now. But it's very small up in here. This area is very small. The surface in which it has to, there's not much bearing there. And the newer ones, you got almost a 1/4 inch on each side.
Now I noticed you didn't have to totally unscrew this. This is an interrupted thread.
Interrupted thread, right.
So it would lock up with roughly a quarter of a turn.
1/4 turn.
All right, now either one of you, when did shooting, first of all, did they ever shoot picket rifles in friendship in competition?
A few.
They did.
They did.
I remember going to Saratoga, New York and Ticonderoga, New York.
They shot a lot of them up there.
Shooting matches in my time where they still had picket rifle matches. So when did what we know today as the current day slug rifle, shooting a longer 2-piece bullet, much heavier gun, when did they start to shoot those rifles here in Friendship?
In the late 30s.
Wow. Who were some of the names that you may recall that started this?
I think Walter Grody probably was the biggest one of all. He searched out these rifles through letters. I mean, that was the only way of communication back then. And would take all kinds of tips he would get, contact the people about the rifle, and then he would try to buy the rifle. And he brought a lot of rifles back into this area just by doing this. Walter Grody was from Akron, Ohio. And as it is, we have a very active and oldest black powder shooting range located very close to Akron, Ohio, called Canal Fulton. And it is, it's a nice place to shoot, but they shoot 40 rods. That's one of the few places you can still shoot 40 rods, and it's fun to shoot, it really is.
Now, somebody told me in the last couple of days, which I was not aware of, and I know you were just at Canal Fulton recently and shot, they just celebrated their 200th anniversary.
It's the oldest active rifle range in the United States, started in 1812.
Really?
Yes.
I've been told by the locals that when they first started, they were competing against Indians.
Really?
Yes.
And I know there's another generation or another school of thought and thinking at Canal Fulton. There's a gentleman there, Larry Thompson, that has done a lot of work building slug rifles.
Correct.
Right. The builders that we are more familiar with, that I'm more familiar with, one, Ken Brazine.
Correct.
And two, Webb Terry.
Webb Terry.
Both were craftsmen. Both were good friends of ours.
Right.
And I wish they were still around.
I do too.
But built some incredible rifles.
Yes, indeed.
And then, actually, there was another person a little bit later that was kind of a disciple of Kenny Brazine, who was?
Jim Godine.
And he made round ball guns. He made a few slug rifles.
Right. Some
of those rifles are still being shot here.
They are. In fact, I'm shooting one.
I think Lloyd Reeser falls in that area too.
In that time frame?
He was long before Godoyne.
Yeah, Lloyd Reeser was the mass-produced them, if you want to know the truth.
I started shooting in '74. At least 50%, maybe 60% of the guns on a line were made by people that were shooting them. Most of the people were machinists. They were actually, and they got the idea to make these guns because they couldn't obtain an older one like this or obtain the ones that Grody was bringing back. So they were making their own. In that process, Lloyd Reeser saw an opportunity, and he started making guns, and that was the bought gun to have. If you were going to buy a gun, you wanted a Lloyd Reeser, and Lloyd Reeser guns became very popular and shot very, very well for years. Still do sometimes.
One other thing, to load these guns, I see you have a piston starter there, which on the picket gun aids in loading the bullet
Yes.
straight. There's one for this rifle also. Now, these rifles are shooting a precise size bullet. This is loaded with a paper patch. Two different types of paper patching. One, tell us the difference in the types of patching.
Well, you started out using strip patches. And a strip patch is just a strip. This gun happens to use 3 strip patches, which means there's 6 seams all the way around it. There became a guy by the name of Chase, and he says, I can make a patch for a bullet, and it only has 1 seam. We just eliminated 5 times mistakes, possibly. And a few people still shoot the Chase patch, and that's something that has evolved one way or another. I think we have better ways to cut the strip patches today. I think we have better machines to do the machining on the false muzzles. So I don't see a difference in them right now, although I think at a time this Chase patch did have an advantage.
Now, this patching, whether it be a Chase patch or cross patching, were indexed to the rifling in the barrel so that the seams of the patching would wind up in the bottom of a groove and not
That's
on
correct.
the top of a land.
Correct. You have to.
So you would not have leakage.
Right.
So, in both of these types of rifles, the bullet actually never touches the bore.
Hopefully not.
If it does, we're in trouble, because that's when it starts leading.
And when it leads, it doesn't shoot.
Does not shoot very well, no.
Well, this is interesting, it's historical, and there has been a definite transition from what you see here in the 1800s to even this type of rifle in the 1800s, the quality of scopes, and it's fun to know that this type of rifle is still shot here today. I know we'll also be able to take some footage on the range of shooting, get a chance to see the type of targets, how people load the guns, how they clean them. Just an amazing sight to watch how these guns perform.
I think it's not that difficult. As a matter of fact, when we get down to the range, we're going to have the cameraman sit behind there, and anybody can shoot them.
Oh, so if he can shoot it, anybody
Anybody
can do it.
can.
All right, we'll do that. We'll try that and see how it goes.
I think it's going to be interesting when you get to the range because you're going to see men, women, kids. You're going to see a lot of people shooting. And I think that's what really makes this whole sport come together is because it is a family sport.
It is a family sport.
Absolutely.
And in my time here, I've seen my children were here.
Yep.
When they were quite young.
My kids grew up here.
Your
that
kids
was the
did.
thing. This is our vacation. 2 times a year we came to Friendship. This is what they look for.
You had your wife and children with you, and we all camped together.
And we all shot.
But
And the best part of it was you compete against each other all day, and then you come back at evenings and you laugh and have fun with all night.
but we starved.
Oh, I know it's terrible eating.
We starved to death.
Yeah, that's a shame.
Not really. We have more food to go around for anybody. Well, look, I really appreciate you taking your time. I know at some point we want to talk more about the builders of today's rifles, which I'm glad. I got to know Ken Brazine.
Yep.
I knew Jim Godoy. I
Sure.
got to know Webb Terry. Many of our shooters, I'll add, do other things other than this. I know you shoot black powder cartridge.
Yes.
You shoot long range rifle.
Yep.
One of the gentlemen I knew that competed with us, Marlon Bassett,
Yes.
was instrumental in pillar bedding.
He actually, he didn't patent it, but he came out with it first, and a neighbor of his tried it, and it went from there. But he never did patent it, and he said it was one of the biggest mistakes of his life.
He was an incredible man to know.
He
I
is.
mean, I know very, very good friends with you. We've lost too many of our friends.
Yep, they're dearly missed.
But thank you both for taking your time.
Okay,
And we look forward to taking a little more of your time on the range.
that's fine.
Good. That's great.